It's time for some figure drawing. You will need yourself, your whole body. So maybe a full-length mirror will be helpful too. I have a photograph. You'll need my rubric. You'll need a pencil, an eraser. A sharpener is always helpful, and maybe some extra scraps of paper. You'll also want something to measure yourself with. A string will do. A ribbon will do. Yarn will do. You could even use a tape measure, but I don't actually want you to use the measuring part of it. We are going to actually do a line gesture. It may look an awful lot like a stick figure to you, but that's the proper way to start a figure. Let's get started. So I have my rubric, which is going to help us keep things in proportion. And I'm going to use this pipe cleaner, but again, you could be using string since my figure is so small because it's just a photograph. You might want to use a whiteboard to do some practicing. It kind of gets easy to erase when you're using a whiteboard. Let's get started. I'm going to go on to my little space here and I'm going to mark the top of my head for my figure and where the feet are. If you look at the rubric, that's the first two things I'm supposed to do. Top of my head, check. Bottom of my feet, check. Now it says find the halfway point. Where is that? Well, if you're standing in front of the mirror with your string, you might hold it up to the top of your head, let it dangle to your feet, and then fold that in half to find your halfway point. Kind of like I'm doing here. There's my top of my head, bottom of my feet. I'm going to fold it in half. Right there is my halfway point. Well, I'm going to line that back up with my body. And here's what I'm noticing. My halfway point is my hips. A lot of times people will say waist, but it's not waist. That's where your belly button is. It is your hips-ish. You're going to notice today a lot of things we're going to do are going to be ish. Now here's me trying to be you, standing in front of the mirror with a string. You might want to help her. Maybe you have a brother or sister who can help you with the string. But the whole point is for you to double check the proportion on your own body. So I'm going to go back to my drawing. Now I just got to have to mark on my drawing a halfway point. I could use my fingers to try to figure it out, but I'll often like to use a pencil or marker. Think of where I think the halfway point is, kind of tip down my pencil and just measure it. I think that's the halfway point. Another way I could double check would be take a piece of paper, hold it up to those marks where I thought it was. That won't change. And look, I did a pretty good job of visually figuring out the halfway point. Okay, so I'm going to check that off on my rubric. Next is my head. It is an oval shape. And I know that it's towards the top of my body. However, what I'm trying to do with coming up with how to draw a figure is relationships. How does my head relate to the rest of my body? Step one is to measure my head. Notice I'm also including my neck. So I took a piece of paper, you would take your string, I lined up with my head and my neck, I made a mark, and what I noticed is that it could fit in 3 times on the top half of my body-ish. There was a little bit extra space there. So it's an oval, and it should fit into the top half of my body 3 times. So here's the tricky part. When you go to do your drawing, you've got to kind of figure out an oval shape that'll fit in 3 times. That's why I suggest that whiteboard. So I think, okay, maybe that oval will work. I drew it. Now I'm going to take a piece of paper and check it. My hand is in the way, but I made it too big. When I checked it, it was too big. So I would have to erase and try my oval again. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. I'm lining up at the top of my head. I'm doing the next mark. Again, my hand's in the way. And I moved it down. Oh, wow, I did pretty good that time. It's the right size. So now I'm just going to put an oval in there. And so now I have an oval that was about 1/3 of the top half, meaning it could fit into that top half 3 times. Now let's get to the spine, but I'm actually going to think of it as a line of symmetry. We're drawing the figure. We are symmetrical, so I am putting a line that connects my head to my hips. That's our spine, but it also helps us to keep ourselves symmetrical. Next, let's go to our shoulders, and what I've discovered before is that we are about 2 heads wide. Here's what I mean by that. If you take your string and take it for the width of your head, then line that string up in the center of your neck, what you should notice is that that shoulder width is about 1 head wide. That's for one shoulder, and then 1 head wide, of course, for the other one. So let's go to your drawing. Go measure the width of your head. This is where it was important that you actually drew an oval and not a circle. And then mark those measurements, 1 head on each side, and then connect them with a straight line. Notice though, it's directly under the head. Yes, there's a space for our neck, but we already took that into account when we drew our oval. We can adjust that when we go do our real drawing, but for now you put your line directly under your head. Check on the rubric. Next, I am at my hips. We already have a mark for the halfway point, but now we need our hips. In the photograph, I'm wearing baggy overalls, so it appears that my hips are wider than my shoulders, but in actuality, they're narrower. If you held up a string to your shoulders, what you would notice is that your hips are actually a little bit more narrow. That's why our arms, when down to our side, kind of rest on the outside. So they're slightly more narrow. That means they're not one head wide, they're a little less than one head wide. So when we go to put it on our drawing, take that one head wide paper and do 2/3 of it. I marked it on the paper so I can make each side even, and there I go. My hips are about 1 3/4 head wide-ish. All right, if I'm feeling good. Next, I'm doing the legs. Pretty simple. I'm just going to go straight down from the hips to where I put the bottom mark. And then I'm going to go check that off on my rubric. I'm erasing that center so it doesn't look like I have 1 foot there. Check. Next is the knee. The knee should be about the halfway point, right? So I'm just double checking. You could double check with your string. Double check. Measure the length of your leg. Fold the string in half. Does that line up with your knee? Now remember, your leg starts at your hip. Don't make it less than that. To find the halfway point, I already had that paper I used before where I came up with half my body. If I fold that in half, boom, I have the halfway point. Makes it pretty easy. I'm going to use that paper a few times. Knees done. Next, how about the thigh? You might be thinking, why the thigh? It doesn't bend or anything. We're going to use that later for figuring out our arm and hand length. But again, I folded that paper in half and boom, I have my thigh. Next comes the feet. Now the feet were included in the line leg, so all I did was do a semicircle. Now I'm going to go check it off on my rubric and on to the arms and hands. Now my arm, if I put it straight down to the side of my body, lines up pretty much with my hips. Just my arm. You might think it goes farther. That's your hand that goes farther. So the hand kind of lines up the fingertips of it with your thigh. Go ahead, check it out yourself. Put your arms by your side and take a look. I'm going to differentiate my hands from my arms with a semicircle. Once I'm done with that semicircle, I will check it off on my rubric. Our line gesture is complete, an underlay for a figure drawing, but our job today is do observations of the figure and find relationships to help keep us in proportion when drawing. So do me a favor and stand and put your arms out to the side, and then take your string and hold it in one fingertip and the other fingertip. What you should notice if you take that length and then hold it to the top of your head is that your arm span, your wingspan, is equal to the whole height of your body. Let's move on. We're going to do a review of what we've learned, our observations about the figure. We have learned if we spread our arms out to the side and measure our wingspan, that total arm length is equal to our body height. We've learned the halfway point of our body is our hips. That means the halfway point is not our waist, not your belly button area. Our head, neck included, fits 3 times equally into the top half of our body. This means our total body height is 6 heads tall. Our shoulders are 2 heads wide, measuring from the center of the neck out. Our spine connects our heads to our hips. We can use that as a line of symmetry in our drawing. We are symmetrical. Our hips are narrower than our shoulders. It's about 1 3/4 heads wide. Our legs start from our hips and stop at the ground. We include the heel of our foot in that measurement. Our knee is at the halfway point of our leg, and our thigh is at the halfway point between the hip and our knee. Our arms start at our shoulders and stop at our hips. Our hands start at our hips and end at our thigh. Our elbows are halfway between our shoulders and our fingertips. Our body has proportion. But, as with all drawing, there's always room for ish in your drawing. If you feel you need to make adjustments, small ones, make them. Let's do this with pencil and paper. Remember, that was an underlay. So we're going to do the same steps, but I'm going to show you what you would do with pencil and paper. Top of the head, bottom of the feet. Halfway point. I need to find the halfway point. You might be thinking, oh, spare piece of paper? Yeah, you have some right here. Just rip it off. So what I'm going to do is use this paper to help me find the halfway point. I think it might be about there. So I'm actually going to mark that on my paper and lightly before I mark it dark when I feel good about it. I was wrong. It was too short. I'm trying again. Whoops, wrong again. I'm going to try it one more time. Move it down just ever so slightly. Finally, that is it. Now I can make that mark a little bit darker on my paper. I now have the top of my head, the bottom of my feet, and the halfway point. Next, onto the head. Like I've said before, this is the hardest part. Draw lightly. I need to figure out an oval that will fit in here 3 times equally. Remember, our neck's included in this measurement. So I'm going to use my fingers the first couple times where I'm trying to figure out what's the size. My pencil is drawing an oval. Not really, right? I'm feeling an oval. When I feel good, like I have the right measurement, that's when I actually touch my pencil down. There's all sorts of sides of this paper. I flipped it over and I'm putting down an oval measurement. That oval I drew the first time was a little too small. I'm going to try it a little bit bigger this time. Notice how it's going to be trial and error. You're going to try a size. It may or may not work. Draw lightly before you actually put a darker line on your paper. Really, you never need a really dark line. This is the underlay of a drawing. I'm showing you there to make sure you have an oval, not a circle. You could even think balloonish instead of ovalish. Right? Our heads are usually a little bit wider at the top and a little bit narrower at the bottom. Done. I have an oval. It fits in about 3 times. I'm going to erase that because I really don't want that on my body. All right, next I'm doing my spine, or what we consider the line of symmetry. When I do that, I should be very aware that my oval should be lined up in the center. Next, I'm going to do my shoulders, finding another empty spot on my paper, measuring the width of my head, using that measurement to figure out the width of my shoulders. 1 head width on each side of the spine. Again, notice I put it directly under the head. Next, onto the hip. I already had that mark for the hip, and I had my 1 head measurement, but I want it slightly smaller. So I kind of shrunk my head width a little bit, notice there, and then I'm marking that on my paper. Now I have my hip, check. I'm on to the L for legs. That's pretty simple. It just goes straight down and stopping at that mark where I said, this is where my body's going to end. I have 2 legs, so I do 2 lines. Check. I'm on to the K for knees. That's about the halfway point. Well, the cool thing about having done that paper thing earlier is I just fold it in half. And when I fold it in half, I found the halfway, and that's the knee, and I will mark it. K for knee. Check. Done. Now I'm on to the thigh. Okay, so the thigh is the halfway. I do need to know that for my arm and hand length. So I just took this paper again and I folded it in half. And now that mark where I folded it is where my thigh is. And I can make little marks there. Next, I am going to do the foot. And remember, it's included already in the height of the leg. So I just want to do a semicircle on top to remind myself this is where my foot is. Now on to my arms. They should just come straight down and they stop right by my hips. Last thing is our hands. Those extend down to my thighs and I add on the semicircle to make them differentiated. This is a line gesture for my figure. It's an underlay, a way to start our figure and keep it in proportion. Here's how we add some form. On each point of your body where you have a joint, where you bend, we're going to add a circle, and we're going to vary it according to size. So I just added on my 2 shoulders and my 2 wrists, and now I'm going to add in my elbows. We didn't make points for that on our line gesture. We probably should have. Those would have been the halfway points. Now I'm doing my hips, my knees, and my ankles. We also need to do our waist, where our belly button is. You probably could do also your neck. I should have done it in this drawing, but I didn't, but you could do a circle for your neck. Now what you need to do is connect all of these circles with kind of a curved line. What you're going to notice is it starts to look kind of like a robot, or really a person, a figure. I'm doing everything lightly. So instead of doing the circle there, I just threw in my neck. And then once you've got the lines and you do your erasing of your inner marks, you should start to be seeing a figure. Now you'll notice that I've kind of sped this up. I'm turning mine into a lady and she's got a skirt on. And so you're just going to start adding as much detail as you want. I've got my legs happening, a little shoes. I'm even adding detail for her hands, a little side view with a thumb. We just spent time on portraits. You can even do a face in proportion. Right? So don't stop it at the body. Go ahead and do a face in proportion. I am not spending time today walking you through adding detail to a figure. You do that. But I am giving you the road to get there with a line gesture. Enjoy.